I'm going to move on to womb transplants. The depressing news about womb transplants, actually. A group of UK surgeons have actually said that they're on the cusp of becoming the first in the world to implant a womb into a transgender woman. So that is to take a womb and put it into a biological man. Now, womb transplants are experimental. They've happened before. There's been 42 done in the world, and that's resulted in 12 live births of babies who have been carried in that transplanted womb. But now those surgeons, they want to make those wombs available to biological men who want to become women. And the reason, they say, is to promote equality. Firstly, to enable these men to conceive and carry children. And secondly, enable these men to express and consolidate their gender identity through gestation, which is, and I quote, I don't know what this means, a transformative experience. So evidently somehow intrinsic to the whole becoming a real woman business. And here are some of their other comments. They say there's no overwhelming clinical argument against performing a womb transplant as part of gender reassignment surgery. Traditionally, infertility has been an unfortunate consequence of the realignment of a transgender person's body with their gender identity. So if you're a bloke and you become a woman, you become infertile. That's what they're saying. The reproductive aspirations of the M2F transgender women deserve equal considerations to those assigned female at birth. So the reproductive aspirations of a man who thinks he's a woman should be treated exactly the same as a woman who is a woman and wants to have a baby. Subject to feasibility being shown in the suggested areas of research, it may be legally and ethically impermissible not to consider performing uterine transplantation on this population. Now let me repeat that. Legally and ethically impermissible to not consider putting wombs into men who want to become women. And they actually invoke law. They invoke the Equality Act 2010 to make the argument that transgender people should not be subject to any forms of discrimination. And so if it's possible, they're saying it's discriminatory not to do it. Now, after shaking my head for a while when I read this, the first question I asked, and maybe you've already thought of it, was, where do they get the wombs? Where do you get a womb for a man who wants to become a woman? And it turns out that the answer is actually twofold. The first answer is that they get them from dead organ donors, as you would normally get, say, a liver or a kidney or something else for an organ donation. So you can imagine if you became an organ donor and then you died and your womb was put inside a guy who wants to become a woman. I don't know if there's special permission they're going to start asking, or if that's just what you can expect as a result of being an organ donor if you yourself are a woman. But there's actually a second source of wombs. And get this. It says the alternative donor pool, that's right, I was looking for that phrase that they use. The alternative donor pool, it says, would be women who have transitioned to become men and donate their wombs for this purpose. So there's a switcheroo. So a woman becomes a man, has her womb removed, and then it gets given and implanted into a man who's becoming a woman. And that costs £50,000. And yet cost is no deterrent, because there's been a whole lot of transgender people apparently approach this team so that they can go in the queue for the experimental procedure. Of course, it's actually not easy because they've never transplanted a woman's womb into a man's body, and they're saying that presents all kinds of complications, but they reckon that they can do it. Now, I've had some surgeries in my time, and this, when I think of a womb transplant, that's a tremendously invasive particularly surgery in sort of the abdomen, the thorax, the body, the trunk of the person. It takes a huge amount of recovery. It's incredibly invasive. It's a lot of paraphernalia. It takes a lot of drugs. There's a lot of side effects. There's downtime in recovery. It takes ages. It's painful. This is going to take a long time. They say 6 months for the implanted womb to heal. I would imagine it would be all of that before this person is going to feel well again. And yet, I fear, given the queue of people willing to undergo it, I think that's partly proof. But I also fear, given what we've seen all around us, that this will only continue, this sort of thing. And it will only continue not just because of what we're seeing, but because Scripture says that it will only continue. Do you know, in the first chapter of Romans, there's a series of things that it says societies can do. It says, firstly, if they decide that there's no God, and if they don't honour God, worship God, and give thanks to God, well, that's the first step to a whole series of things which follow. And the first thing which follows is that they will continue to do that because, of course, the conscience bears witness, because, of course, creation bears witness, because, of course, we can't escape from the knowledge of God, the Bible teaches. You think of the prodigal son of the pig pen, right? There was no safe space in all the world where he could stop thinking about his father. He remembered. And it's the same teaching in Scripture all through. So if you say that God is not real, then you're going to have to go on denying God. You're going to have to actually live a life that shuts him out, that makes sure that you continue to be busied with stuff that keeps him out of your knowledge and thinking, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, Romans 1 says. Okay, fine. So that happens. So there's a whole pattern of life now. But of course that then creates a vacuum. See, who now is highest and greatest? Who is worthy of serving? Who's worthy of allegiance when there is no God? It's easy, right? I am. Romans 1:25, they exchanged the truth about God for the lie and worshipped and served creature rather than creator. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche was the man, the famous philosopher who wrote God is Dead. But you know what else he wrote? He said, if there is a God, how can I bear not to be that God? That's exactly Romans 1 teaching. And that's exactly what people do. That's the human condition worked out in a philosopher's work. But here's an interesting point that relates exactly to the conversation that we're having. What is the truth about God specifically that Paul is referring to? And you know, yes, it's the truth of God's existence, absolutely. But more specifically, he's focused on something. He says especially the truth about God as the eternal creator. Go read it yourself and you'll see. And so I think that actually the ultimate expression of the truth exchange in a culture, the worst expression, if you like, the fuller expression, is seen in people dethroning God as creator and taking on that position for themselves, enthroning themselves as God creator. Who gets to say what is right and wrong? I do. I make the rules, I make the morals, I write the law. Who gets to set the standards? I do. Who gets to define what is reality even? Well, you start to see that I do. You start to see that's where culture is headed. Who says which sexual ethics are good and natural and healthy? Well, it doesn't even matter what the research and the science says, because I say what I want to do and I say what's right. But even more than that, we've got to a point where we say, well, who says what is a man and what is a woman? And whether I am a man or I am a woman, again, nothing other than me. As those doctors were saying, to align their body with their gender identity, because they now are creators. We are the creators now. And you know, these kinds of efforts, which help us make believe that we have the power to be that creator, will only continue because we know that that analysis of society is bang on the money. And that is unfortunately what we can expect to see. And we must hold firm to the truth that God is creator. And I believe proclaim the fact that God is creator, that God is real, because that is becoming just the antidote to all of this, as Paul said a very, very long time ago in a book called the Bible in Romans.